Hey everybody, happy Turkey Week and happy Native American Heritage Month. So, every November since 1990, the United States celebrates Native American Heritage Month. The commemoration of the month provides a platform for Native Americans to share traditions, music, crafts, and dance with others. So, this week we are going to do something special to celebrate Native American Heritage Month. So, what we're going to do is we are going to create a Georgia O'Keeffe inspired Native American blanket. And we're also going to talk a little bit about who Georgia O'Keeffe was. So, Georgia O'Keeffe was known for her gigantic flowers, but in the summer of 1929, O'Keeffe made the first of many trips to northern New Mexico. So, this is where she got inspired to create her Native American and Hispanic landscape paintings. And that is what we will be doing today. We won't be painting, but we are going to make a Georgia O'Keeffe inspired Native American blanket. Okay? So, what we're going to do first is we are going to watch a video on the history of Native American culture, and then we're going to watch a quick history video on Georgia O'Keeffe. And after both videos, I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about our project. So, stay tuned.
Native Americans. Do you know who the first people to live in America were? People think it was Christopher Columbus and his crew. Others think it was European settlers or people that came to live here from Europe. But it was actually the Native Americans. Native means they were born in America, though it wasn't called America at the time. This was long before it became the United States. They were here much earlier than Columbus. When Columbus discovered America and its people, he named the people Indians because he thought he was in India. You may have heard other people call them Indians too. The correct term for how we refer to them is Native Americans. The Native Americans lived in both North and South America, including Alaska and Hawaii. There were different tribes and cultures who lived in different parts of the country. A tribe usually consisted of families or communities that spoke the same language and had common beliefs. They also shared the same customs or traditions. Some well-known tribes include the Cherokee, Apache, Cheyenne, Iroquois, the Ute Nation, and Navajo Nation. There were many other tribes as well. Each tribe has its own type of home, foods they ate, tools, clothing, and more. The tribes are no different than people across the world today who have their own cultures and customs. Most historians believe the tribes were quite peaceful before the arrival of Columbus and other Europeans. Native Americans designed their homes according to the weather and area where they lived. A teepee was built using long poles for the frame or structure. The poles were tied together in a bundle at the top. Each of the legs or poles was then spread out, creating a large circle at the bottom. The poles were then wrapped with buffalo hide to protect the people from the weather and to keep them warm. The teepees could easily be taken down and put back up again, making it the perfect house for people who moved a lot. A wigwam was about 8 to 10 feet tall. Like the teepee, it was also made from wooden frames. These frames were covered with sheets of bark from a birch tree. Native Americans also used birch bark to cover canoes because it was waterproof and strong. It was also used for other things like baskets. A wigwam was more rounded than a teepee. Some wigwams were covered with grass. Those were called grass houses. Grass houses were much larger than a wigwam. A longhouse was a permanent home. Unlike the teepee, it was not moved from place to place. It was built from wood and bark in the shape of a rectangle. Holes were created in the roof to allow air to escape. There were doors on both ends of the house, similar to many houses today. Tall poles from trees were curved and then used to create the roof. These houses were also covered with bark. Long houses were about 80 feet long and 18 feet wide and could hold about 20 people. A pueblo was a home built right into the side of a cliff, which is why it was also called a cliff dwelling. These homes were built of bricks made from clay. They sometimes were built inside of caves. Some pueblos were 4 or 5 stories high. Ladders were used to go from floor to floor. These houses could hold many people. Some other types of Native American homes were wattle and daub, plank house, igloo, and chickee. The materials used to build homes depend on where the tribes lived and what was available to use. The clothing that the Native Americans wore were also different from tribe to tribe. If an area where Native Americans lived was warm like Arizona, then less clothing was worn because of the heat. In contrast, if it was a cold area like Alaska, clothing was layered for warmth. A common material for clothing was animal skins. The soft leather of the animal hides was used for shoes as well as covering for some of their homes. Plants and cotton were also used for clothing. Native Americans used the resources around them like plants, bark, and roots to create dye. They used the dyes to color their clothing, baskets, mats, and other items. Many tribes hunted buffalo or caribou for food, as well as deer and rabbits. Fishing was widely used to provide food for villages that were close to rivers or streams. Spears, nets, and fish traps were made to catch the fish. In cold regions like Alaska, ice fishing was common. A small hole was cut into the ice and long spears were used to catch the fish. Farming was important to many of the tribes, especially in warmer climates. Main crops included corn, beans, and squash. Native Americans created many beautiful works of art. Pottery is the process of using clay to create handmade pieces. These works of art were not only beautiful, but very useful. Pottery was used to store grain and other foods. It was also used to collect water. Colorful baskets, blankets, and carvings such as totem poles or sculptures carved into large tree trunks were created. Some tribes, like the Navajo and Pueblo, were famous for sand paintings. Native Americans also had traditions which included religious and other ceremonies. Stories, music, dancing, games, and sports were enjoyed. Like every people and culture in the world, the Native Americans lived, worked, and played based on their beliefs and customs. Native Americans still live throughout the United States today. Thanks for following Clarendon Learning. Be sure to subscribe. For more free resources, check us out at clarendonlearning.org.
All right, kids, let's get started. So Georgia O'Keeffe was born in 1887.
Georgia, Georgia.
In a big old farm right up there in Wisconsin. She found beauty in simple things like flowers, mountains, seashells, and animal bones. She loved painting things from nature. She didn't really like painting animals or people. It was more like nature things. And when she painted those things from nature, she would paint them big, bright, close up, and in a simple fashion. Sometimes she would even just paint things that she imagined in her head. Georgia was very good at drawing and artwork, so her parents said, hey, you should study and go to school for it. So she went to several schools. And at one New York City art school, she even won a prize. Georgia loved New York City because it was so busy and exciting. She would visit one art gallery very regularly. That gallery was owned by a famous photographer, Alfred Stieglitz. Yeah, sounds good. Years later, Georgia would marry him. After working in New York City, but before marrying Alfred, the guy who owned the art place, Georgia took a teaching job in Texas. She loved Texas too. She loved the clear skies, the heat, the blinding sun, and the amazing storm. Texas inspired her to create some great paintings. Alfred, her future husband, noticed the work she was doing in Texas. He talked Georgia into coming back to New York City. He told her she didn't have to have a regular job like everyone else. She could just come to his studio and paint. It was around this time she started painting flowers, the work she's most admired for, and made her famous. She liked to paint her flowers huge. This was in the 1920s, way long ago, back when there were very few female artists out there. So her work got quickly recognized and everyone loved it. She continued working with Alfred and painting in his gallery. And by the time she was 37, they were married. Years later, Georgia returned to the desert. This time, New Mexico. She ended up spending the rest of her life there, even after her husband Alfred died. Georgia met tons of artists through her lifetime. Not once did she copy any of their artwork or take their designs or anything like that. She didn't even think her own work was that great. And that's what truly makes Georgia O'Keeffe amazing and original and unique. On January 10th, 1977, another long time ago, President Ford, the President of the United States at the time, awarded her with a Presidential Medal of Freedom. That is the highest honor that an American citizen can get. Georgia O'Keeffe lived to be 98 years old. She died on March 6, 1986. That is just 2 years less than 100 years old. She even painted up until a few weeks before she died. Well, on that note, we're all done.
All right, guys, welcome back, and I hope you enjoyed that little video break. So, I want to know one thing that you learned about Native American culture. So send me a private message in Google Classroom and let me know one fun fact that you learned about Native American culture. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move into our project. So for our project, we are going to create a cow skull, and we are going to be using the element lines to create our blanket. So let's go ahead and get ready. So this is what you will need in order to do this project. You're going to need paper, a ruler if you have one, crayons, or markers. So the first thing that we're going to do is draw our cow skull. Now, if you need additional help, feel free to rewind the video and just take a look at this handout because I'm going to be moving pretty quickly in the time-lapse video. So, all right, so we're going to start with a curved horizontal line, and we're going to connect everything together with 2 vertical lines. So now we're going to make the horns. And to give it texture inside, we're going to make some vertical lines. So now we're going to add the eyes, the nose, and the rest of the detail lines. And now we're just going to color in the nose and the eyes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use our ruler to make our lines. So we're making a pattern for our blanket. So as you can see, I'm making multiple vertical lines. And at the bottom of our blanket, I'm making a couple of triangles or a wavy line to finish off my blanket. Okay? So I'm going back in and I'm just adding some details. Okay, so you can use different shapes and lines to create your blanket, as you can see. And you want to think about what colors you want to use to fill in your space. So I'm using a variety of warm and cool colors. So of course the blue is a cool color. I'm using that yellow. So just take your time And make sure you're coloring in the same direction. As you can see, I'm coloring up and down. Okay? Just make sure you take your time. And as you can see, the only thing that I colored inside of my cow skull was the eyes and the nose. Everything else, I decided to leave white. Okay? So as you can see, I'm halfway done. And you're just going to continue to color in your space. You can add as much details to your blanket as you would like, or you can just add a few details. It's up to you. So once you're done, just make sure that you upload your picture to Google Classroom. Just remember, if you are confused on any of the steps, feel free to go back to the beginning. Feel free to look at that handout. But this is pretty much it, guys. I'm almost done. As you can see, I used a good variety of warm and cool colors. So keep that in mind when you're creating your blanket. And I'm just trying to decide what color to use next, and I'm using that blue to finish it off. I hope you guys enjoyed this project, and I hope you guys have a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving break. Talk to you soon. Bye.